externalities, go over all the different scenarios I think could happen in monopoly and perfect competition. And then just go over the labor market graphs again, because I think we spent the least time on them this year. All right. And I'll put the chat up in case you want to ask a question. So I'll have the chat there. All right. So this is the positive externality. We know PB to SB, marginal product, where it says QE, that really should be more Q market. If I take the market up, I have the deadweight loss. A key to know that you picked the right triangle is notice the point of the deadweight loss is pointing at Q optimal. All right, we're under allocating. QE is less than, the market is less than the optimal. So we need to subsidize. The subsidy is the market line from MPB to MSB. Okay, so that would be after the subsidy, deadweight loss would disappear and you'd have no deadweight loss. All right, now there's another way this positive externality could go. Notice the supply curves are going from PBC to the right to MSC. For a negative, they go to the left, but here they're going to the right. This would be, say, instead of subsidizing by giving financial aid, they subsidize to build more colleges. All right, so, you know, the private costs would go less than the social. Again, though, you take the market, which in a positive externality, say would be the first one, straight on up, your deadweight loss again is pointing to your externality. All right, I just want to show you this in case they put it out, because it's just another way, Luke, that you could show positive externality. And they've never put it on, but I wanted to show it in case they put a graph like this, you guys wouldn't totally be freaked out. Okay. So what it's doing, though, is if you're going from private to social, the costs are going down. All right. So just like if you see it on a multiple choice. Now, the negative, there's going to be a flipped one there because you're going, supply is shifting right instead of left, Luke. We're going from MPC to MSC. Does that make sense to you?
Yep.
Okay. And I wouldn't freak out because probably at most it's a question. And, you know, one question isn't that big of a deal, but I just hate like going in if I haven't shown you everything. All right. Now, here is the typical, and we go MPC to the right to MSC, but the typical negative externality is MPC to MSC. I take this QE up, and that would give me my deadweight loss and how much the tax would have to be. All right. Now, you could imagine there's going to be another negative externality, and this time you're going to have demand shifting left. Again, from right to left here, the first one's going to be the market. You take it right up, and there's your deadweight loss. All right.
Mr.
Yes.
Will we still tax even though like the graph is flipped?
You mean here?
Yeah, like for the negative externality, would you still tax to like internalize it?
Okay. So here, all right, you're talking about this one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You'd just be taxing consumers instead of producers. So say like Wall, for a negative externality, you might do an excise tax on the producers. Here, you might do an excise tax on every person who smokes, like more that the consumer's paying the tax instead of the producer.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
All right. All right. So those are that. Again, it would maybe be a question. I wouldn't spend it like, I'd spend the time we just looked at it to think about it. And if you see it on a multiple choice, you know, just if you see it, you could know and identify it. All right. Here's what I really want to spend the bulk of the time, because I do think like monopoly is very often the number one question. All right. So I'm going to try to go over all the points of the monopoly. All right. G is the profit maximizer. MC equals MR. All right. Hold it. I'm going to go back in a second. All right. There's the one with demand, and there's the one you usually use. So there's the one you usually use. And there's the demand one.
Thank you.
No problem. All right. So here, like I said, G is the profit maximizer. MC equals MR. We take it up to demand. There's PM. All right. I then go straight on the profit maximizing line down to ATC and across. That's my profit box. PM, E, QM, and let's just call this 0 for now. That would be my total revenue box. All right. PM, E, QM, and O would be my total revenue box. ATCM, F, QM, and O would be my total cost box. Sometimes they ask you to shade that in. All right. Highest total revenue, MR hits the axes. I take that straight up. That is unit elastic. To the left is elastic, and anything to the right is inelastic. Okay. All right. Now, where MC crosses demand, there's a couple of things that could happen here. One is that's socially optimal or allocatively efficient. They mean the same. That's socially optimal or allocatively efficient. The second thing is if they say this monopoly starts to act or operate like a perfectly competitive market, I go where MC crosses demand, because that's like supply and demand. MC's the supply curve. So I would go here and go across, and that's my perfectly competitive price. And this is my perfectly competitive quantity. And notice for the perfectly competitive price, it's lower than the monopoly, and I'm producing more on the quantity. So it's allocatively efficient and socially optimal. All right. Now, the third thing also is they could say, how about if this monopoly starts operating like a price discriminating monopoly? Well, price discrimination would not have MR. So demand would equal MR. I'll get you in 1 second, Luke. Demand would equal MR. So where MC equals MR, and I go down, and that would be my quantity. Notice my quantity is greater than a regular monopoly. I would then take this line down to the ATC and across, and everything above this line and below demand would be profit. So my profits are greater. All right. Now, allocatively efficient is MC crosses demand. Allocatively efficient or socially optimal. Price discrimination is MC crosses demand. And where perfect competition would operate is MC crosses demand. Okay. So again, it's three things: allocatively efficient and socially optimal, price discrimination, and perfect competition. All right.
Mr. Bressler.
Yes,
When would marginal revenue become demand?
in price discrimination.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. All right. Now, where MC crosses ATC, that's productively efficient. Okay. Lowest cost, productively efficient. Where ATC crosses demand is fair return, which is zero economic profits. And I think if you did any of the free response, and one of the free responses I had today, I think they asked you for, the fair, how much could they produce, the most they could produce without losing money. And that would be fair return. And if they asked you, you would take that down for the quantity and you go across. And since ATC is touching price, it would be zero economic profit. Okay. All right. There's one other thing that I'm going to switch to another graph to show you. Sometimes they'll ask, how about if this monopoly, and say they said QM was 20, how about if they produced 19 units instead of 20? All right, so 19 units would be somewhere around here. I would just take it up. And I could tell you price went up and quantity went down. Now, because I'm in the elastic part of the curve, when price goes up, total revenue goes down. I'm also moving further away from marginal revenue, and the axis, so I'm moving further away from the highest total revenue, so I know total revenue goes down. Okay. I'm going to switch to, I think, another graph that would also go over monopoly, some different things in the monopoly. All right. So I just wanted to show you a lump sum tax. All right. A lump sum tax, all it would do is shift ATC from ATC1 to ATC2. Notice that nothing else changes because MR and MC aren't affected. So deadweight loss stays the same, consumer surplus stays the same, highest total revenue stays the same, price and quantity stays the same. The only thing that would change is profitability. So a lump sum tax in both the monopoly and perfect competition does what? It changes ATC. Now, if this was a lump sum subsidy, instead of ATC going up, it would go down, but it would still not affect deadweight loss, not affect price, not affect quantity. Matt, what also results in more deadweight loss? Sorry.
I was talking about when you produce less than the.
Oh, yes.
Profit
No, you're right. It would increase. Okay.
Okay.
And I thought I had deadweight loss down somewhere here. Okay. And I'll talk about deadweight loss, I think, in the next slide. Okay. All right. So this is lump sum. Now we have, holy freaking cow, we have per unit. Okay. Now, Matt made this point, and since he made it, here is allocatively efficient and socially optimal, right? Where MC crosses demand. All right. Allocative efficient. Anytime you go further away from that, you're increasing deadweight loss. Anytime you come closer to that, or even get to the other side of it, deadweight loss is decreasing. Okay? And obviously, MC crossing demand is zero deadweight loss because you're efficient. All right, here is a per unit tax or an excise tax, which by definition is a per unit tax. And what you would do is you're going to shift AC up. But the more important thing usually is shifting MC to the left and remembering that you now have a new price and quantity, because MC hits MR, price is at A1, notice it went up. Quantity's X1, notice quantity went down. Kind of like when I said one less unit, when you look at it here, deadweight loss increases. I'm moving further away from the MC equals demand, the original one. So deadweight loss is going to increase. All right. So you're there. And I mean, let me see. I probably should just draw a deadweight loss thing here to make us go. So deadweight loss would be this up to the MC. Okay. So that would be the new deadweight loss. And then let's see, could I get a different color here? Let's see will this work. And this was, the blue was the original deadweight loss. And that big red that I drew was the new, and you could see deadweight loss increased. Okay, price and quantity changed, deadweight loss changed, profits changed. Any questions on the lump sum or the excise tax? Okay. I also want to say for a monopoly, they have the same shutdown rule. All right. You shut down if price is lower than AVC. So you shut down if price is lower than AVC, and you exit if price is lower than ATC. Now, I'm going to just slide back up to the last slide and say to you, I said lump sum tax, right? A change, like an increase in fixed cost would do the same thing, ATC up. A decrease in fixed cost would have ATC down. All right.
Mr. Bressler?
Yeah.
What's like the exact definition of an excise tax again?
A per unit tax on the producer.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Okay. Now, if this was a subsidy, ATC, a per unit subsidy, ATC would go down and MC would go to the right. All right. I just wanted to show you, because on one of them I saw a demand shift. All right. All right. So we're going to start out at MR and P1, right? So MR equals MC. You have P1 and Q1 as the price. And now let's say demand shifts right. So you're going to have MR and AR. All right. So you're going to have your marginal revenue and your demand curve both shift right. Now, again, when you do that, you have a different MR equals MC. So C is at P2 and price is at Q2. And look, it's the same thing as a regular demand shift. Price up, quantity up. If it went the other way, it'd be price down, quantity down. All right. So I wanted you to see that.
Wait, Mr. Bressler, what happens again if there's a subsidy, you shift ATC and MC?
Yes. If it's a per unit subsidy, Luke, you shift MC to the right and ATC down. If it's a lump sum subsidy, you treat it like
just ATC.
Only ATC, okay?
And that is only in lump sum. So what if it's not a per unit subsidy? What if it just says subsidy, or will it always say?
No, they're going to either tell you per unit or lump.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. All right, and then I just wanted to, again, show you the natural monopoly, downward sloping ATC, MC below. Okay, and it's usually there because one company could better serve the market. Like think of like originally cable TV or originally, BG&E. And again, MC equals MR is the monopoly price. Fair return, zero economic profit, no profit is ATC crosses demand, PF and QF, price and quantity, and then socially optimal, PR and QR. All right. And here, if I'm shifting to the right, Jordan, notice my price is getting closer to MC, so my deadweight loss is decreasing. My deadweight loss after the shift would be CE, that little triangle there. Does that make sense to you, Jordan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Anytime you're moving
decreases.
closer to the original MC equals demand, you're going to decrease deadweight loss.
All right.
All right. And there is your natural monopoly. All right. I was then going to just go over some perfect competition. A lot of it is kind of the same in a way, but I just wanted to review it. All right. Here is side-by-side perfect competition. In the long run, you're making zero economic profits. Mr. Dopp, remember, marginal revenue equals demand equals average revenue equals price. I guarantee you there's a question or two that if you just know that, it'll become an easy answer for you. All right, the profit maximizer is MC equals MR. Now, I'm going to flash back to this monopoly here for a second. In the monopoly, you are not producing, MC equals demand is socially optimal. We're producing at that C line, so we're not producing at socially optimal, okay? If I go back here, MC crosses ATC, we're not producing there either. So monopolies are not allocatively or productively efficient. But in the long run, notice MC is through ATC, so it's productively efficient, and MC equals MR, so it's allocatively efficient, okay? And so it is the only market that's productively and allocatively efficient. Now, because MC equals MR, and that's where you produce at, there'll not be deadweight loss in perfect competition. Okay. Now, they sometimes, they ask this, what is the price in the industry compared to the firm? Well, they're the same because the firm is a price taker. And be very good at two little things here. One is taking this price across, and it's got to be the same price here because that shows it's a price taker. And if you're graphing, make sure your MC is coming through ATC at its lowest level. And that's the same for monopolies. All right. So a typical question would be something like the demand of roses doubles. The demand, the demand curve shifts. I now have new prices and quantities. And I'm sorry, but it's really hard for me to graph here. So you just put in all your labels. But now be careful for the next question. They're going to ask you what happened to price and quantity. Price and quantity might be different in the industry and the firm. So make sure, is it the industry or the firm? They almost always are going to ask you to come back to the long run. Okay. So here we're making money. Firms are going to enter. I know I have to come back to this zero economic profit. So right there. So my supply curve is going to come, and they're probably going to ask you, why, how do you get to zero economic profit? Firms enter, supply and industry shifts right, and there you go. Okay. Anything on that? Now, here, if they don't say anything, the lump sum subsidies and the per unit subsidies and the per unit taxes all happen on the firm. All right, so I'm going to do subsidies this time since I did taxes. A lump sum subsidy is going to shift ATC down and AVC. Both of them are going to go down. Okay. Now, does it change price and quantity? No. Does it change profits in the short run? Yes, in the short run. Because in the long run, what's going to happen? I'm making money due to this shift in AVC. So firms are going to enter, right? Supply is going to shift right, and I'm going to get to zero economic profit. And I'm going to have a different price and quantity than when I started. So even though lump sums don't change price and quantity in the short run, because they get you out of zero economic profit, they could change it in the long run. Now, the excise subsidy is going to be the same as far as, I'm going to only shift ATC this time, just so it's not as confusing. It's going to shift ATC down, and a per unit subsidy shifts MC to the right. Now, it doesn't change price in the short run because it's there. It does change quantity. It does change profitability, okay? I'm profitable now. Again, firms are going to enter. Supply in the industry is going to shift right. Okay. Now, like I said earlier, sometimes instead of saying a lump sum tax, or a lump sum subsidy, they'll say a change in fixed cost. Fixed costs increase, ATC up. Fixed costs decrease, ATC down. They could put a price ceiling, all right? For it to be binding, it has to be below the price. And you would just treat it like the price is here. And actually, let me just draw this better because it's probably a good thing to like. And here's a price ceiling where we would shut down because price would be below AVC. So we'd shut down. All right, obviously a price floor would be above it, and you just treat it like that's the price.
Mr. Bressler?
Yeah.
How do we know where to draw AVC? Is it always below the ATC?
It's always below the ATC. Okay. And really, the only time you have to really worry about the AVC is if they ask you about shutdown. Okay?
Okay.
All right. That is, they also might say in perfect competition, what happens if this firm raises its price? What will happen to total revenue? Well, total revenue would go to zero. Why? Because thousands of other people have the same exact product at a lower price.
So it decreases revenue, or you just say it goes to zero, which is
it goes to zero. Yeah.
Is that the same thing as saying revenue decreases?
I would say go to zero.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. So just like this graph is not perfect, but just really, they give you 4 points usually for graphing these. So point 1 for the industry, labeling it whatever they tell you to label it. Point 2 for Mr. Dog. Point 3 for MC crossing ATC at its lowest, and point 4 for the quantity in the firm. I mean, that's 4 out of the 10 points for drawing the graph. So really make sure you can draw that graph perfectly in case they have it. All right, I'm going past my allotted time of like 30 minutes, but I just, I don't know what I was doing. Showing you the profit box. I just want to show you the labor markets, okay? Here is your monopsony market. All right. In a monopsony, it is, as in the other labor markets, MC equals MRP is the profit maximizer. I take it down to supply. Why? Because it's a monopoly in the labor market. I don't have to pay the big price. So I go to WM for the wage, QM for the quantity. All right. Just know that MRP is MP times P. That's how you could calculate it. Sometimes they ask you to figure out the MRP for like the second worker or something like that when they give you a chart. All right. Perfect competition would be supply crosses demand. Supply, MRP is D equals MRP. Okay. So that would be where supply. Notice perfect competition, wages are higher and more workers are higher. Now, the last thing for this is if they put minimum wage, and I'm going to put it right in between those two, you would just take that line, and they would draw this line because it would be probably a multiple choice, and you take it right to the first, if it hits supply or demand, and that's the quantity. But it's good to know that minimum wage increases the amount of workers in a monopsony, and it's the only market that does it. Any monopsony questions?
What was the last thing you said about minimum wages?
It increases the amount of workers hired, and it's the only market that does that.
Is that if the minimum wage goes up or just having a minimum wage?
No, minimum wage going up.
So that increases the amount of workers?
Yeah, in a monopsony. Okay. And then the last thing is, I just wanted to show you the side-by-side labor chart again, just because, again, we didn't do this a lot. It's the supply and demand. Instead, it's wage, right? And then you take it across, but instead of taking Mr. Darp across, you take supply equals MRC equals wage. And then you have downward sloping demand equal MRP. No short or long run here, just that, okay? Again, MRP equals MP times P. So any change in the marginal productivity, any change in the price of the product is going to shift the demand curve. The supply curve here is really going to get shifted by the industry because you're a wage taker. All right. Any questions on anything?
Could you go back to the monopsony graph real quick? I just wanted to write it down.
Yeah. Maybe. I'm trying. There it is. Anyone else with any questions? Okay.